Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here and good evening. I'm Sandy Moore and I'm the Director of University Libraries here at Yeshiva University, and it's an honor to open up this special evening dedicated to the memory of Leah Adler. Leah served as the head librarian of Hebraica and Judaica at the Mendel Gottesman Library for more than 30 years, guiding its growth, its collections, and its transformation into one of the foremost Judaic libraries in the world. Her professional excellence was matched only by her kindness, generosity, and genuine concern for her colleagues. On a personal note, I had the privilege of working with Leah for a short period of time when she was the head of the Mendel Gottesman Library and I was the head of the Pollock Library. For my very first days at YU, Leah was warm and welcoming. She helped me learn the ropes and shared her deep knowledge of both our institution and its people. And I will always be grateful for her kindness and the example she set of quiet leadership and collegial grace. This evening's colloquium brings together scholars whose works reflect Leah's passion. It is a fitting tribute to a woman whose life and career were defined by devotion and learning to others. Thank you all so much for joining as we remember Leah Adler and celebrate her enduring contributions to Yeshiva University and Jewish scholarship. And it is now my great honor to introduce to you the president of Yeshiva University, Rabbi Behrman.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your great opening words and for your leadership of our amazing library. It's so personally moving to be here tonight. I'm looking at the computer, has the picture of Leah right in front of me. And, you know, I am, of course, the president of Yeshiva University, but more importantly for this evening, I am a cousin of Mark and Leah and have grown up with them as really profound influences on my life. We just sat, Mark and I, in the sukkah just a couple of weeks ago in Katamon, where we sit every year together at his brother Sammy's home, speaking about Leah and her memory and her legacy. And, you know, for our family, Leah certainly lives on, and in my capacity also as president, I can say that she certainly lives on in our library and in our hearts and all the work that we do at Yeshiva University. It's really a zchus, a privilege to welcome Mark here, to welcome Lawrence here, who's been so kind to us, and we're so grateful for the extended family and our extended family at Yeshiva for this very important, moving evening. You know, we're right in between parshiot that I think gives a good frame for the colloquium and for Leah's life. We're just coming off of the section of the Parsha where we're told that society began to industrialize and they built a Migdal Bavel, they built a tower, and then right afterwards we're told the story of Avram. I'm saying that as, I'm calling it as President Trump calls, Avram, and this frame, these two sections really provide for us a sense of the purpose of the Torah and of our and what our values truly are. What is it that Migdal Bavel, that the Tower of Babel, what is it that they've done wrong, that God came in to abolish their efforts? And of course, there are many different explanations. One of them is that while there's nothing wrong with building a tower, their focus was nasa lanu shem, was to build for themselves a name. The reason why they built the tower is because they're worried that people would be scattered and forget about them. And they wanted to build an edifice to themselves and broadcast their name to the world, so that no one would ever forget about them. In contrast, when Avram traveled to Israel, He sits himself by the crossroads, specifically by the places that need the tefillah, that his children will need the tefillah, by Shechem, and he builds a mizbeach, and he builds an altar. An altar compared to a migdal, compared to a tower, is very small. It takes a very small space. It's not very tall, not very large. But therein lies the difference. Because while in Migdal Bavel, their focus was Nasa Lanu Shem, was to make for themselves a name. Avram came by Ibn Shamizbeach by Yikra B'Shem Hashem. Avram called out in the name of God. While one generation thought how they're going to self-perpetuate, how they're going to spread their own name to the world, Avram tried to spread not his name, but God's name. Not through building large towers, but by spreading the truth to all that came in contact. Kasuto explains that Avram Dafka specifically chose this place, or these places, because they rested at the crossroads of Israel, the north, south, east, and west, main arteries. And this is where most people were passing through. And he specifically went to those places to spread the name of Hashem. You know, I see Leah, and I think about her life. First of all, and primarily, being very up close and personal with her family, as Avram went specifically to the places to pray for his family, for the future. Her dedication, her love, her relationship with Mark, their union has always been an example for all of us. With Mali and David and Kenai Nahara spreading family, generations, we're seeing Leah's incredible warmth and influence continue, and Kain Yirbu only with bracha and mazel. And for us at Yeshiva, we know that Leah understood actually what true influence is. That it's not by building towers, but it's by building libraries. These are the altars in which those who come to seek the Lord find them through the ideas and through the svarim, through the books, which she so carefully built with this library of books and manuscripts, and the kitvei yad of generations of our thoughts in this place where everyone can come and learn and study. And vayikra b'shem Hashem, in the name of God and the truth that God stands for, will spread. That is the truth of Judaism. It is only through our books and ideas emerging from the Torah. It's only for the mizbachot, the institutions, the schools, the libraries, all of these, the homes that spread the word and truth of God. That is actually how to perpetuate. And that's the irony that the Migdal Bavel had to disband when they sought such great grandeur, but it's Avraham who sought to spread the name of Hashem, and he, of course, is the one who we remember as we are B'nai Avraham. It is for this reason it's certainly fitting for us to honor Leah's memory with a colloquium. Meaning we honor her memory of someone who dedicated her life to spreading the words of Hashem, to spreading the words of Torah by studying Torah deeply and profoundly, both with academics and in the yeshiva, the absolute bridge of Yeshiva University, what we represent, what she represented. We will continue our work. Yeshiva, wherever we are, will never end, and Leah's memory will always be carried with us through and through. It should only be with great love and fortune, with tremendous thanks as we put up this plaque. But her memory is not just going to be in a plaque. The plaque for Leah is truly in our hearts and in our souls. Tehei Zechro Baruch.
Thank you, President Berman. I'm a little shorter. Good evening and welcome to our guests, members of the Adler and Yeslzon families, Yeshiva University Administration, President Ari Berman, and Dean Rebecca Sipis, faculty, staff, and friends. I'm Tina Weiss, the head librarian of the Mendel Gottesman Library of Hebraica Judaica here at Yeshiva University. This evening's colloquium honors the legacy of Leah Adler, Zichronah Livracha, and brings together the personal and the academic, with presentations from family, as well as noted scholars who have interacted with Leah, as well as serve as educators at Yeshiva University. This is unique. In fact, many of the evening's attendees have also interacted with and benefited from knowing Leah. As longtime head librarian of Mendel Gottesman Library, Leah's acumen and care, concern and erudition were obvious to those that had the privilege of interacting with her. Leah oversaw the great growth of the library. In the time since we last gathered in June 2019 for Leah Shloshim, much has transpired in the Jewish world and the world at large, and I'm glad we were able to join together for this event. Three main foci come together through the presentations for this evening. One, Eretz Yisrael, the place where she lived as a youngster and for which she had a great passion. Two, Tanakh. We'll soon learn about Leah's connection with Tanakh study. Three, German Jewish life, her lineage. Okay. We will now play a video from Rabbanit Molly Adler Brofsky by way of video. Molly was unable to be here today. Molly is the daughter of Leah, Zichronah Livracha, and Dr. Mark Adler. Rabbanit Molly Brofsky is a senior faculty member and in-house mental health professional at Michlelet Mevaseret Yerushalayim. She also teaches for the Wurzweiler School of Social Work at Hebrew University and runs a clinical practice in Gush Etzion.
Thank you all for being here. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Dr. Lawrence Cooney for his generous donation to the library in my mother's memory. This gift honors not only her, but the place where she found such joy and purpose and where she was able to live out her values of diligence and service every single day. To the library staff, my mother's second home, thank you for the ways you worked alongside her and became family to her. Your warmth and professionalism reflected the very best of what my mother valued, and we are honored to see the community you created together. To the distinguished speakers who are taking part in this colloquium, thank you for lending your insights to this gathering. Your presence enriches this day. My mother was born in 1946 to a family that fled Nazi Germany after witnessing Kristallnacht. She spent her first 11 years in Israel, and those years left an indelible mark on her. She told me stories of early Tel Aviv, a city that was more sand dunes than skyline, as well as memories from later in her life. For example, when she was one of the very first overseas students to study in Michlelet, of visiting the Kotel on Shavuot for the first time since its liberation after the Six-Day War. She loved the land with a deep, abiding connection that never left her. When my mother was 11, her family moved to Switzerland. This move, to the precision and order of Swiss life, affords me an opportunity to talk about the importance of my mother's Yiddish heritage, the distinctive culture of German Jews known for their diligence, their sense of responsibility, and their unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. These traits weren't abstract values for my mother. They were woven into her personality. This was reflected in her punctiliousness in everything, including Torah and mitzvos, as well as her caring attention to detail in all aspects of her life and relationships. It was in everything she did, in her steadfast presence, in her dedication, in the way she showed up day after day, doing what needed to be done with care and love. My mother was the youngest in her family, a much beloved daughter after 3 sons. Her love for her family and theirs for each other ran and continues to run deep. My mother was a serious student, devoted to both her secular and Jewish studies with diligence. Her knowledge and love of Torah and Tanakh is exemplified by her winning the Chidon Tanakh and going on to participate in the International Chidon Tanakh in Israel. She was rare in her generation. For me, this is exemplified in the memory that I was one of the rare classmates whose mother could help her also with her Chumash and Judaic studies homework, and who didn't have to wait for her father to come home to get answers to her questions about Torah. At the same time, she was on the verge of completing a degree in biochemistry, her mind equally at home in the world of secular studies and the laboratory as the Beit Midrash. When she met and married my father, they moved to America, beginning a new chapter that would define the rest of her life. What they built together was a life of giving and chesed, first in New Haven, where my mother first worked at a library, the Yale New Haven Library. Their house there became a home of chesed in the truest sense. The house was always open and always hospitable. I remember our Shabbos table in New Haven, filled with students who found in our home and our Shabbos meals at the dining room table a warmth and a welcome they never forgot. And this didn't stop when the family moved to Lawrence, New York. The house always remained open to anyone who needed a place to stay or a bit of refuge. To me, the prime exemplar of this is the Kiddush my mother would wake up early to prepare every single week, without knowing who or how many people would show up, and with her often arriving from her consistent shul going when the Kiddush was already in full swing. It always amazed me, that constancy, that generosity, week after week after week. In the years since, countless friends and relatives, both from my childhood and from different stages of my mother's life, have told me that they have never forgotten her warm and loving presence and the way she made them feel seen and cared for. There was so much more to her than quiet devotion. She had a sense of humor that caught you by surprise, a genuine curiosity about the world and the people in it, an enthusiasm that made being around her simply fun. She was quick-witted, engaged, fun and alive in a way that quietly drew people to her. This, too, was part of the warmth that she brought to everything she did. A few words about her work at the Mendel Gottesman Library. Her work at the library became more than a job. It was a second home. Everything about it was a perfect match for her traits, her skills, her knowledge, and her commitment to excellence. Her coworkers became her second family, and they experienced that same warmth that we knew, that quiet but unmistakable devotion and care. In summary, my mother was born in Eretz Yisrael, and she carried that land and the Zionist promise of redemption in her heart her whole life. She carried, too, the values of her Yekish heritage and the gifts of her own personality, diligence, responsibility, a commitment to doing what was right. She lived them quietly, steadily, day after day. She never sought the spotlight, but those who knew her understood something profound. Her impact on the people around her was deep and enduring. It was quiet, but it was unmistakable. The students at our Shabbos table, the friends and relatives who found refuge in her warm presence, her co-workers at the library who became family, her family who learned what love looks like when it's expressed not only in words, but in constancy, in care, in an open door and an open heart. This is the legacy she leaves us. Not one that announces itself loudly, but one that speaks through the lives it touches, the connections it deepens, and the love it inspires. Thank you to all of you for being here today and for honoring my mother's memory. It is a testament to the life she lived, the connections she made, and the love she gave so freely. We are deeply grateful.
We would like to thank Molly for sharing her reminiscences with us this evening. Dr. Mark Adler, husband of Leah Zichronah Livracha, will share recollections from Aryeh Jesselson, Leah's brother, as well as share his own words and thoughts with us.
Thank you all.
He was not elected.
This is truly Chesed Shel Emes. We come here to honor Leah, who is in a better place, and we honor that memory. We expect nothing for it. But what we can do is we can take specific parts of it and whatever things we learned from it and maybe find sometimes a guide to where we want to go or what we want to do. I am not going to spend your time and my time and our time enumerating things that are so self-evident to people who knew it, who knew her, and suffice it that our presence here today is a testimony to the fact that those traits were appreciated. I am going to read a letter from my brother-in-law, Aryeh Jesselson, who unfortunately, or fortunately, cannot be with us, because he has a wedding this coming week of his grandson, which he is attending in Israel. So he wrote these few words for us, and I have the privilege of reading it to you. So please bear with me. You have to be able to see what I'm doing. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this colloquium. Our family is deeply touched that so many of Leah's colleagues chose or choose to honor her memory. Although I am not academic, that's my brother-in-law, I'm an academic. I am Leah's oldest brother, that's him, and as such will speak for my two other brothers, David and Eliezer, and myself. The organizers requested that I speak about Leah, both as a person, as well as seen through our family history. My remarks are anecdotal and based on my recollections. There was a 10-and-a-half-year gap between Leah and myself, I being the oldest and she being the youngest. We grew up in Tel Aviv, but because of the age gap, I had little deep involvement in her life. At 18, I joined the Israeli Defense Forces. He's not a chassid. And Leah was only 8 years old. When I was discharged from the army, Leah was 10 to 12 years old, and at that time, essentially, our parents moved to Israel, our parents moved to Switzerland with Leah, while I moved to the States to attend college. When Leah married Mark Adler, she moved to the United States and lived in Connecticut for many years. Since we lived in Riverdale, we were finally able to spend some time together. Leah's outstanding qualities were chesed, anova, chochmah, and tznius. In 2024, Yeshiva University published a testimonial volume entitled Remembering Leah Adler, with touching accounts of her influence on her colleagues, co-workers, and staff. Many of you knew her as the head librarian of Hebrew Judaica Library at Yeshiva University. But she didn't start there. She studied at the ETH in Zurich, the ETH, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, equivalent to our MIT, and received the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in microbiology. After getting married and settled in the United States, Leah probably felt that she could not give science its due time while also running a household, so Leah changed careers and decided to study library science, and she found her new profession very fulfilling. This is halomus. The real reason that she gave up biochemistry, which he doesn't know, but I know very well. She went to Yale Biochemistry Science Lab and wanted to study biochemistry. And she showed them her degree from MIT. The fellow had an interview with her, and he said, okay, great. All right, I'll be very happy to take you on, but you have to know that this is a 2-year commitment. At which time Leah looked at him rather dumbfounded. She said, well, she says, my husband just started his fellowship half a year ago, and he's due to finish in a year and a half. And I don't know where my husband is going to go when he finishes his fellowship. So the guy said, well, young lady, if you can't commit to 2 years, then it's useless. You might as well go home. That was the end of Leah's biochemistry career. And it was very typical of Leah. She didn't say, well, we'll see, we'll do. She says, well, wait a minute, I can't commit, I don't know. Straightforward and honest as silly as it was. But it turned out for a much better purpose because she loved library sciences. She loved what she did, and she was very, very good at it. Now, my brother-in-law continues. That was an ad lib by me. Our parents, Dr. Sigmund and Lena Jesselson, were both products of the Torah in Derech Eretz ideology, developed in the first half of the 20th century Germany. They both grew up in what you would call modern orthodoxy. Both sets of grandparents were completely integrated into the general society while being strictly observant. Our maternal grandfather, Dr. Leo Forsheimer, was a dermatologist. Unfortunately, he died at a relatively young age, over 100 years ago, when my mother was not quite 11 years old. As a result of this, our mother had very few memories of her father and really had no stories to tell about the family. Our mother's family hails from a small village called Hesdorf in Lower Franconia. After emancipation, Jews were allowed to move freely and settle in cities. So our mother's great-grandparents on both sides moved to the nearby city of Würzburg, the capital of Lower Franconia. Despite consisting of only 2,500 people, the Jewish community of Würzburg was a significant Jewish hub. Our mother attended the Jewish elementary school, acquiring a basic Jewish education. In contradistinction to our father, our mother did not mingle very much with non-Jews, as all her friends were from the Jewish community. This probably helps explain why our mother did not have the same emotional ties to her birthplace which our father's family had. Our mother was very capable and studied dentistry. She graduated and got her degree, even though the Nazis were already in power. However, she could not find employment as a Jew in Germany and emigrated to Palestine. She was living in Tel Aviv, where she met our father. Now, my brother-in-law continues. I would like to take a few minutes to speak about our father's family, whose background was very different. We had the good fortune to grow up with our paternal grandparents, since they lived in the same apartment building as ours in Tel Aviv. As a result, my siblings and I spent a lot of time together with our grandparents as we grew up. My grandfather took us for walks in Tel Aviv, read us German fairy tales when we were sick in bed, and told us many stories about his hometown, Neckar-Bischofsheim, which took on the flow of a fairy tale to us as children. I remember him fondly and clearly, since I was already 18 years when he passed away. The first mention of Jews living in the neighborhood of Neckar-Bischofsheim was in the year 1337. Jewish figures recognizable by their Jewish hats appear in a fresco painted on the wall of a local church. The church was built in the 10th century and later enlarged. During one of our route trips, we were told of the age of the church. My daughter Noah picked up, "This is even before the time of Rashi." From the Middle Ages on, the phenomenon of Landsjude, the Jew of the land, or in Hebrew Am Ha'oretz in its original meaning, existed to a large extent in southern Germany, and to be more precise, in southwest Germany. In that area of Germany, there was a large number of small Jewish rural communities. After emancipation in the 19th centuries, many Jews left these rural communities and moved to the cities. Those who remained in the villages were generally more conservative, with a small c, both in their general outlook and in their religious observance. Therefore, the Reform movement flourished only in the cities, while the small rural communities remained Orthodox. Jewish education was sparse. However, the Jews clung to their heritage and never hid the fact that they were Jewish. In contrast to what was found in Eastern Europe, these rural German Jews, at least starting in the 19th century, felt part and parcel of the general society. While remaining true to their Jewish tradition, they participated fully in the civic life of their communities, of their towns. Our grandfather, Samuel Jesselson, for instance, who was strictly observant and the last president of the Jewish community of Neckar-Bischofsheim, was at the same time the recording secretary of the local voluntary fire brigade. He held this post for 40 years, till he was ousted when the Nazis came to power. In addition, he was also a member of the city council at some point. My grandmother, Amalia, was a member of the women's group until she too was ousted for being Jewish. My uncle Ludwig Jesselson told the following story, which illustrates the degree of integration of the Jews within the wider community. The Jesselson house was located next to the village church, and the local pastor called upon the local children to come by help ring the church bells by pulling on the heavy ropes which were connected to the bells. When the pastor called upon my uncle to help, his father did not object. This complete integration into the general society while maintaining one's Jewish identity has only occurred a few times in Jewish history. This was the case, among others, during the Golden Age in Spain, and nowadays in the United States. I think to his last day, my grandfather could not reconcile himself to the fact that his beloved Heimat, his homeland, spat him out. Recognizing and valuing this period of integration is probably what led my grandfather to conclude his description of the end of the Jewish community of Neckar-Bischofsheim with these words in translation. May those who are now dispersed in all parts of the world never forget the old Heimat, home and homeland, and transmit to their children all the beauty and goodness they experienced in their homes. If this happens, then the old Kehillah did not exist in vain. In fact, the fact that my grandfather, living in Tel Aviv in 1942, after being forced out of Germany, still refers to Neckar-Bischofsheim as the Alte Heimat says it all. It is surprising but touching that in many of the small towns where Jews once lived, there is a local resident, usually a school teacher, who has taken it upon himself to research the local Jewish history and to perpetuate the memory of the Jewish community which once existed. In our case, it was a Mr. Walter Zeller. A few years ago, I asked him what made him so interested in the Jewish history of this small town. His answer was fascinating. Born and raised after World War II, he noticed that the locals referred to many of the homes by the names of the families who did not live there. For example, there was the Jacobson house, the Oppenheimer, the Yesslzon house, and so on. When he asked the older people why these houses were named after families he did not know, he hit a brick wall. The older people would tell stories about things which happened prior to World War II, but nobody would tell any stories about things which happened during World War II. So he started researching the matter, and to his surprise, he discovered that there was once a Jewish community with a rich history, which was decimated by the Nazis. Having described the backgrounds of the society in which Leah's parents grew up before emigrating to Palestine, I would like to speak a little bit about our father. Our father was very intelligent and a bit of an introvert. He was an avid reader and always the top student in his class. In his memoirs, he mentions that he did not suffer from anti-Semitism while in school, due possibly to his high-class ranking. Originally, he wanted to study chemistry, but it would have been difficult to find employment in that field as a Shomer Shabbos. Therefore, he decided to study law at the nearby Heidelberg University and received his law PhD degree summa cum laude in 1928. After being accredited as a lawyer, our father joined a law firm in Karlsruhe headed by Ludwig Marum. Dr. Marum was also a politician and an ardent member of the Social Demokratische Partei Deutschland, SPD, a left-of-center political party, and was a member of parliament, the Reichstag. Due to the fact that he was Jewish and a member of the SPD, he was already arrested and killed by the Nazis in 1933. When he was paraded through the streets of Karlsruhe, my father waved at him from a window at the office. The Nazis then raided the office, but luckily our father had run to a higher floor and thus escaped arrest. A few days later, he left Germany for good and went to London. After 6 months there, he traveled to Palestine and decided to remain. Our parents met while working in the same bank in Tel Aviv. They married May 1st, 1935 in Jerusalem. Our family was imbued with the values of Torah and Derech Eretz, responsibility and hard work. Leah was the embodiment of these midot. Yehi Zichra Baruch. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Shuli Berger. I'm the curator of special collections, and I was actually asked to have the honor of dedicating the plaque. And Leah and I worked together for many years. We puzzled over a lot of manuscripts together and other issues. We were also very good friends. I miss her very much, and I feel her soul in this space and together with me in the library. This plaque is a tangible representation of a generous donation by an anonymous donor in honor of Leah's many years of service and to acknowledge her contributions to the library. So I'm going to read the plaque since I don't think everyone can see it from where you are. It says, "In memory of Leah D. Adler, Zal, whose wisdom, knowledge, counsel, generous spirit, and devotion guided the Mendel Gottesman Library as its longtime head librarian of Hebraica and Judaica." So the plaque will ensure that her memory lives on here, and I invite everyone to take a look at it.
I have the pleasure of saying it's not an anonymous donor. Dr. Lawrence Cohen.
We are now pleased that Rabbi Meir Goldwicht will address us. Rabbi Meir Goldwicht is the Joel and Maria Finkle visiting Israeli Rosh Yeshiva of Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary at Yeshiva University. Rav Goldwicht delivers lectures on Jewish law and thought throughout the United States and Israel. He is the author of the multi-volume Meir Panim, essays on Jewish holidays. Rav Goldwicht's talk is entitled Ahavat Olam Ahavtich, Ahavat Israel, Shel Leah Adler, Lebeit Yesosson Zal. Just so everyone knows, Rabbi Goldwicht will be addressing us in Hebrew. Mostly?
Sure.
Okay, בטח.
ברשות נשיא הישיבה, ראש הישיבה, הרב ברמן שליטה, ברשות סנדי מור, דוקטור מרק אדלר, טינה, תודה רבה, מוריי ורבותיי. בורא העולם ברא אותנו עם 5 חושים. אחד מ5 החושים זה חוש הראייה. המיוחד בחוש הראייה, ראשית, אפשר לקחת מכל אחד כמעט את הכל. שלא יאכל, שלא ישתה, שלא יהיה בן חורין. יש דבר אחד ששום כוח בעולם לא יכול לקחת את זה מאף אחד. וזה איך להסתכל על מצבים שונים שקורים לנו או קורים סביבנו. זוהי החלטה בלעדית שלנו. אתן לכם דוגמה. גמרתי לתת שיעור באחד המקומות. ניגש אליי יהודי מבוגר, נותן לי כמה דפים ביד, הוא כותב בכתב ידו, הוא איבד את כל המשפחה שלו בשואה, עבר 5 מחנות השמדה, הגיע למחנה החמישי, נתנו לו מספר, שם חדש. המספר 116-990. זאת אומרת, זה שלפניו קיבל ספרה פחות, זה שאחריו קיבל ספרה יותר. שבור לגמרי, אין לו משפחה, אין לו שם, יש לו מספר. אחרי כמה ימים, שהוא התרגל לשם החדש, למספר, הוא אומר, רגע, איזה מספר? 116-990. וואו, 9 ועוד 9, 18. ועוד 6, 24. ועוד 1, 26. 26. הקדוש ברוך הוא, זה החתימה שלך? י' כו' כ'. זה מה שכתוב בשיר השירים, שמני כחותם על ליבך, כחותם על זרועיך. זאת אומרת, אתה איתי, אתה הולך לעזור לי. הצורה שבה הוא החליט להסתכל על מצבו, נתנה לו את הכוח להמשיך, לשרוד ולהקים עולם חדש. אז ראשית, אנחנו מחליטים איך להסתכל על מצבים שונים. אף אחד בעולם לא יכול לקחת את זה, בכל מצב. דבר נוסף מיוחד בחוש הראייה, אשתו של לוט, שבורחת מסדום, היא מסתכלת ככה לחצי דקה, עם חצי עין, לראות מה בכל זאת קורה בסדום. היא לא רק מתה על המקום, אלא היא נהפכה לנציב מלח. למה להפוך אותה לנציב מלח? זה שהיא מתה לבד, זה נס גדול, זה מפחיד. למה להפוך אותה למלח? כי התורה מלמדת אותי, איפה שאני מסתכל, שם אני נמצא. הראייה תמיד תיקח אותנו להיכן שאנחנו מסתכלים. שהפסוק אומר, ויהיו עיניך רואות את מורך, בכל תחום בחיים זה ממש לא משנה איפה יושבים. מקדימה, מאחורה, מהצד, הראייה תמיד תיקח אותנו להיכן שאנחנו מסתכלים. זה המיוחד בראייה. א', אנחנו מחליטים איך להסתכל על מצבים שונים. ב', איפה שאנחנו מסתכלים, שם אנחנו נמצאים. איך באמת זוכים לראייה נכונה? התשובה היא, כשיודעים לחבר בין הפרטים לתמונה הגדולה. מי שחי רק את הפרטים, סוגר את עצמו. מי שחי רק את התמונה בגדול, הוא תלוש, הוא נמצא באוויר. שיש את האיזונים בין הפרטים ובין התמונה הגדולה, אז אפשר להתמודד ולהשיג כל מטרה. הראשון שלימד אותנו את זה היה אברהם אבינו. והוא יושב פתח האוהל. מתחילת הבריאה, תורה שבכתב, תורה שבעל פה, הפתח תופס מקום גדול מאוד. השילוב, מה זה הפתח? בחוץ זה התמונה הגדולה, בפנים זה הפרטים. לעבוד בספרייה, מה שלאה עליה השלום עשתה פה בצורה בלתי רגילה, זה דבר ראשון להתעסק בהרבה מאוד פרטים. מספר הספר, איפה הספר נמצא, יש את הספר, אין אותו, כמה ספרים יש, וכו' וכו'. אבל המיוחד אצליה היה שהיא לא רק התעסקה בפרטים בצורה בלתי רגילה, היא גם ראתה את התמונה בגדול. היא לא רק ידעה איפה כל ספר נמצא, היא גם ידעה מה כתוב בכל ספר. מה כתוב בכל ספר. לאיזה ספר כדאי להמליץ, לאיזה ספר כדאי לעיין בו. זה היה אחד הדברים המיוחדים שלה, וזה היה לא רק בעבודה ביום יום, גם בחיים הפרטיים. שנים היא הייתה משכימה בשבת ראשונה לבית כנסת. שבת בבוקר, לפני הגברים, לפני כל הנשים, ראשונה. כדי לעזור לכמה נשים שהיו צריכות את העזרה שלה. וברגע שהיא מגיעה לבית כנסת, אז זה לא נראה כאילו היא באמת עוזרת להם, אלא היא באה להתפלל וכבר שמה היא עוזרת להם. תמיד היא ידעה לראות את הדברים, לראות את הפרטים ולראות את התמונה הגדולה. אם כך, חז"ל מלמדים אותנו שם, שם, בגימטריה ספר. כל אדם כותב את ספר החיים. כל יום זה דף בספר. אחרי 120, כשסוגרים את הספר, שמים את השם על הכריכה. והשם של הספר צריך לבטא את מה שיש בתוך הספר. שם, הגימטריה, הערך המספרי של המילה שם, זה ספר. והספר של לאה, עליה השלום, היה ספר שסגרו אותו, היה כתוב עליו לאה. כי מה זה לאה? לאה זה ראשי תיבות. לעזור אני הולכת. לייעץ אני הולכת. להסביר אני הולכת. בכל מקום, בכל זמן, זאת הייתה לאה. והכל בענווה ובצניעות. והרבה פעמים היא הייתה אומרת, אמרה לי הרבה פעמים, אני לא בדיוק יודעת, אבל אני אשאל את בעלי, בטח הוא יעזור לך. זאת אומרת, תמיד אין תשובה לא. אנחנו נמצא את הפתרון, ותמיד נוכל לעזור בכל דבר שצריך. טוב שם, משמן טוב. שמך טוב, האצילות שהייתה בך, לאה, והענווה הגדולה שהייתה בך, היא נמצאת לנגד עינינו, לנגד כל מי שמכיר אותך. תן הקדוש ברוך הוא, שתהי מליצת יושר על כל המשפחה, על כולם, ונזכה באמת במהרה לאור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו במהרה לאורו.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldwicht. Our next speaker is Rav Daniel Feldman. Rav Feldman is the Rosh Yeshiva of Rabbi Elchanan Theological Seminary at Yeshiva University, and the Sgan Rosh Kollel and Educational Director of the Bella Harry Wexner Kollel Elyon. He's an instructor in the Saisim School of Business and serves as Mareh Da'atra of Congregation Or Sadia in Teaneck, New Jersey. He is the author of multiple works on Jewish law, including the Bina B'Sfarim series, as well as works on Lashon Hara and Halachic workarounds, and is a sought-after lecturer in the area of artificial intelligence and Jewish law. Rav Feldman's talk is entitled The Halachic Status of Jerusalem Today. Rabbi Feldman.
Thank you so much for just this incredible tzibur, for Sister Rabbi Berman, for everyone here. It's really such an honor to be here and to just say a few words about a topic that was so dear to Leah's heart, the topic of Eretz Yisrael, but specifically Yerushalayim, the center of the world. And the question of how exactly to relate to it today and how to relate to it in its more expansive sense. What we call Jerusalem today is much greater geographically, it's much bigger than historical Jerusalem. And the question of the holiness of the Kedusha that we know is associated with Yerushalayim is a double question when we consider contemporary Jerusalem. It's a question whether the Kedusha that has been there historically, does it continue to be there today? And if so, how far can it be called to extend? How far can it be labeled to be attached to? Can it be attached to all of what we call contemporary municipal Jerusalem? So both of those are independent, important questions. We know that the holiness of Jerusalem is very, very old. It goes back at least to what we read about in next week's Parsha, when Abraham goes up to Har HaMoriah, to the place that God will tell him to past that incredible Nisayon. It could be that it goes back even earlier. The Maram Shik suggested in his Sefer HaMitzvos that it goes back to the 6 days of creation that we read about last week. It's a concept that's very ancient, that designation that God has bestowed upon a special place which isn't even identified in the Torah. More than 650 mentions in Tanakh, but in Chumash itself, the word Yerushalayim doesn't appear, and the Rambam and Mar Nevuchim has a number of explanations why that is, all of which resonate with many of the concerns that we know about today, the concern that perhaps the nations of the world would have tried to interfere with the destiny of Yerushalayim had it been identified too soon, or perhaps they would have tried to take it over, or perhaps even internally the tribes would have all clashed and fought to be the owners of Yerushalayim itself. So in the Torah it's referred to as that place that God will select and is granted that holiness from its earliest days. But the question of whether it's still considered to be holy today, so that was a topic of debate among the Rishonim. The Rambam notably felt that the holiness of Yerushalayim endures because he writes the holiness of Yerushalayim comes from the divine presence, from the Shechina, and he writes the language Shechina eina b'teila. Whatever has happened, that Shechina, that divine presence, is not negated. However, other Rishonim disagreed for possibly two different reasons that may be combined depending on how you understand it. One reason, the way the Revel expresses it, is that the sanctification of Ezra was not meant to be permanent because he knew there would come a time when there would be a greater sanctification, so therefore it was only meant for a limited time and doesn't endure today. And the other possibility, which may be related, is that the reality of it being conquered came and came and negated that holiness. And that brings up the possibility, as Rav Avram Avidan discusses in one of his Svarim, that if that's the case, if the Kedusha had been negated by conquest, so then perhaps that means 1967, perhaps it can be undone, that conquest, and it can be restored. So the question of whether that means there is now a new level of sanctity, maybe two of the three opinions instead of one of the three opinions, could mean there's a sanctity to Yerushalayim. And even if, as you know, even if there continues to be a mosque on top of the Beis HaMikdash location, but perhaps it's a raya from the Yerushalmi that wherever taxes are paid to, that's considered to be ownership, and therefore maybe there's a sanctity that emerges from that designation. So that's all a possibility. So maybe 2 out of 3, or 1 at least, or possibly 2 out of the 3 views in Rishonim may have a sanctity to Yerushalayim that endures, but presumably we would assume that that is the old city. That is a very limited part of what we call Jerusalem today. Is there any basis to say that municipal Jerusalem, geographically so much a larger area, can that also be considered to have any halakhic status that we associate with Jerusalem? And there is some basis. There is what to talk about. The question, first of all, of extending the holiness is a concept that was discussed in the Mishnah, Masechet Shavuos, and the Gemara. It's a discussion of how that could be done. It's quite a task. It involves a whole list of requirements, Karbanos, and Shir, and Amelech, and the Sanhedrin, and the Urim V'Tumim. So it seems like a pretty daunting list, as though it's a machlokes whether you need all of those things or maybe just one of those things. Either way, it's a daunting list, especially considering that the Rambam assumes that we need all of those things. And in any event, as Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach pointed out in the Tshuva, that even if one could have assumed that we met any of the definitions of any of these things, when Yerushalayim expanded, it wasn't done with the intention of extending the sanctity, and therefore it's a hard case to make that the Kedusha, in the technical sense, has ever been expanded beyond the old city. However, there are other purposes for which Yerushalayim can indeed extend that designation, and they're meaningful too. It's a point that Rosh discusses in his Sefer, where he notes that the phrase Kiryas Melech Rav that we recite in the Shir Shal Yom for Monday, the most recent Yom Yerushalayim was on a Monday, so it had a special resonance to say that phrase on a Monday, and he understands it a little differently than some of the Mefarshim, as the idea of Kiryas Melech Rav is a reference to the idea that it is the capital of the great king, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is God's capital in addition to being the Makom HaKodesh VaHamikdash, and therefore there's a dual status. It's very significant for its holiness, and it's very significant as the capital of the holy nation, and therefore it's possible that in that sense it can be extended. And the Gemara in Shavuos talks about how there were two marshes by Yerushalayim, one that actually was holy and one that wasn't, but they treated them both as if they were holy, not because that was actually the case in a technical sense, but because it gave the people a greater passion to protect it, and that was crucial for national security. And that's perhaps a basis to say that even a political designation could be considered significant in the definition of Yerushalayim. And there are other reasons as well. There are other halachic purposes for which Greater Jerusalem is considered Jerusalem. The writing of the get, how we decide when the Megillah is read, if the Megillah is read on the 14th or the 15th, the practice of not delaying a burial. All of these draw upon a broader definition of Yerushalayim, and very significantly, Yeshiva is learning Ksubis this year, so the Gemara is in the end of Ksubis, which talk about Hakol Malin Eretz Yisrael, Hakol Malin Yerushalayim, that if a husband and wife argue over where to live, and one of them says, I want to go to Eretz Yisrael, so then that spouse wins, and if one says, I want to go to Yerushalayim, then that spouse wins. So what if they say they want to go to Jerusalem, it's not technically the old city? Is that also considered to have a superiority over the rest of the land of Israel? And many assume that yes, that is the case. But perhaps there's also one additional point that we'll just make note of quickly, and that is that Chazal have a notion that the future will bring, that Yerushalayim will expand tremendously. It's a question how exactly that's going to be designated and what exactly the status is going to be of all of that area. Will they have Kedusha or not? Is there any limit to how far Yerushalayim can be expanded? It's something that Revel talks about in his Sefer, but that's apparently a part of the future that we anticipate, a much greater area to Yerushalayim. So if that's a part of what we associate with redemption, so today the areas that are called municipal Jerusalem, it means in a sense to have a tremendous sign on them that says designated for expansion in the time of redemption. And they carry with them this message of hope of the future, that we look at everything that's called Jerusalem today, and that has a message of redemption attached to it. And that's an incredible thing to think of. And we heard Molly talk about how Leah always walked around with that hope of redemption that she carried with her from her youth. And that notion that that message is conveyed to everyone who sees Jerusalem on a map, who sees Jerusalem in person, who reads about it, who cares about it, who thinks about it, it's a very powerful thought. And the role of a librarian is to show people where they can go and where they can look at in order to be elevated and to be edified and to be uplifted. And that role is the role of contemporary Jerusalem as well. It's something that Leah personified and could be connected to and can be remembered through. And it's a very powerful legacy which we all cherish greatly. Yehi Zechra Baruch.
Professor Naomi Grunhaus is our next speaker. She is the Associate Professor of Bible at Yeshiva University's Bernard Revel Graduate School, Stern College, and Yeshiva College. For more than 2 decades she has taught Tanakh and methodology of biblical interpretation. Professor Grunhaus has published widely and is the author of The Challenge of Received Tradition, Dilemmas of the Interpretation in Radak's Biblical Commentaries. She's also the co-editor of From Scrolls to Tradition, a festschrift honoring Professor Lawrence H. Schiffman. Professor Schiffman. Professor Grunhaus will address us on anti-Halakhic and non-Halakhic interpretations in Ramban's Torah commentary.
Before I start, I just want to express my appreciation to Leah, Zichron Bracha, for her vision and dedication, and for the outstanding Judaica collection that she nurtured and cultivated, from which I have benefited ever so much over the years that I've been here. I also want to thank all the library staff who have always been gracious, forthcoming, and competent in support of my scholarship. In methodological statements throughout his various works, as well as in his applied method, Ramban reveals an attitude that scripture contains multiple layers of meaning, be they pshat, which is the straightforward meaning of the text, remez, the hinted meaning, usually philosophical, drash, rabbinic, sometimes halachic and sometimes homiletical meaning, or so the secret meaning, usually Kabbalistic. This paper will examine Ramban's offering of pshat interpretations in legal contexts, specifically when these interpretations conflict with or cancel rabbinic traditions. In discussing interpretations that contradict halakha, scholars distinguish between anti-halakhic and non-halakhic comments, a distinction which is important for our analysis. An anti-halakhic interpretation negates the rabbinic interpretation. The two cannot be true at the same time. For example, something like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If the text is taken literally, that means that you have to poke out the perpetrator's eye. But Chazal said that it was money instead, and if you're gonna put money instead, then you're not gonna take out his eye. On the other hand, a non-halakhic interpretation is one that is different from the rabbinic interpretation but does not cancel it. Anti-halakhic statements are more revolutionary than non-halakhic ones because they directly undermine the authoritativeness of rabbinic halakhic interpretations. Ramban's commentaries contain both anti-halakhic and non-halakhic interpretations. Because of time constraints, I am only going to present two examples of anti-halakhic, but in the full paper, which I have promised to publish, I will analyze non-halakhic ones as well. Owing to the powerful influence of the ancient sages who had set the standards for normative religious practices, and due to the continuing importance of those standards for the Jewish communities throughout the millennia, rejection of rabbinic legal decisions was inevitably more problematic and complicated than rejection of agadot, or rabbinic traditions in narrative contexts. Consequently, it is far more common for commentators to offer pshat interpretations that conflict with rabbinic traditions in narrative context rather than in legal context. And Ramban is one of relatively few commentators who offered pshat interpretations in legal context, even when they canceled rabbinic traditions, which makes this method especially noteworthy. Previous studies, such as those of Yehuda Cooperman, Menachem Kasher, and Moshe Aaron, have noted examples of Ramban's offering anti-halakhic pshat interpretations. However, these studies did not specifically examine Ramban's approach to pshat in legal contexts. Rather, they analyzed his oeuvre as part of their analysis of the methodology of all biblical commentators. The most comprehensive analysis of Ramban's approach to this topic is Yossi Erel's important article. He notes an innovation in Ramban's method, that he considers interpretations of verses to have binding authority even in a normative sense. Erel also demonstrates that in halakhic contexts, in cases of conflict between pshat and drash, Ramban will often weigh both options and attempt to bridge the gap between them, showing how the pshat and drash work together, or how one could explain the pshat, the straightforward meaning of the verses, in a way that supports the drash. Erel notes that only in cases where there was absolute contradiction and no way to bridge the gap between pshat and drash did Ramban bow to rabbinic authority in much the same way as Ibn Ezra had done. While several of Ramban's predecessors had offered pshat interpretations in conflict with rabbinic halakha, he went beyond that and showed how pshat and rabbinic rulings functioned in tandem. Our findings confirm the importance of both realms for Ramban, and Erel's recognition of the common structure of Ramban's comments, which include pshat, a rabbinic halachic tradition, and then the reconciliation of the two, is important. However, Erel's results do not take into account cases in which Ramban allows the contradiction between pshat and drash to continue to exist, in what others would refer to as anti-halakhic interpretations. In a later study, my colleague Mordechai Cohen confirms Erel's findings, stating that Nachmanides will never adopt a pshat interpretation at odds with the halakha, as was the striking tendency of Rashbam. Although it is true that Ramban often attempts to reconcile pshat and halakha, we must disagree with Erel's comparing Ramban to Ibn Ezra in this area. Ibn Ezra is aligned with the Spanish tradition of bowing to the rabbis in halakhic contexts and not considering the pshat interpretation at all. but Ramban was heir to the Northern French tradition, which allowed Pshat to remain conflicted with rabbinic consensus. It is important to recognize Ramban's attempt to reconcile Pshat and Drash not as his starting point, but rather as coming after the fact, after his first allowing Pshat that conflicts with Halakha. So let's take a look at some examples where he presents anti-Halakhic interpretations. The way the sheets are organized, you have the verses, the psukim on the front and back of one page, and the Ramban text on the front and back of the other page, so you can look at the verses that correspond to the Ramban at the same time. For example, and this is page 1 of source 1, Deuteronomy 21:13 states that a soldier may take a beautiful captive woman and Eshet Yivat Torah as a wife only after a month-long procedure in which, among other things, she shaves her head and sits in his home mourning over her loss. In his Pshat interpretation of the verses, Ramban suggests accordingly that the soldier is forbidden from cohabiting with the captive woman at all until the procedure is completed. In this case, the Pshat interpretation directly cancels the rabbinic halachic tradition from Kiddushin 21b, which permits the soldier to live with her once before implementing the procedure. Thus, the Pshat interpretation that Ramban offers in this case is anti-Halakhic. And I bolded and underlined the key markers where you can see how he lays out this contradiction. Ramban puts effort into showing how both the Pshat interpretation and the rabbinic interpretation align with the verses. And he admits that this is the way of the Babylonian Talmud in many places, that the Gemara definitely assumes that the soldier can live with her once on the battlefield. In Ramban's analysis, both views can be explained to align with the verses and would appear that both seem logical to him. Ramban also validates the halakhic tradition as being the majority accepted view in many passages in the Babylonian Talmud. Had Ramban ended his observations here, this comment would be a classic example of anti-halakhic interpretation, in which both views are valid and acceptable. However, after exploring both views, Ramban adds support for his Pshat interpretation based on a passage in Yerushalmi Makot 2:6. And you see the passage there that you say in the name of Rav that in the case of the beautiful captive woman, only the first act of cohabitation is permitted, and I say neither the first act nor the second act. The apparently rejected minority halakhic opinion offers additional support for Ramban's Pshat interpretation, since, like Ramban, it also forbids the soldier from intimacy with the captive woman until the procedure has been completed. Moreover, the rabbinic opinion explicitly bases this view on the same verse as Ramban does. The existence of a rabbinic tradition that says exactly what Ramban's Pshat interpretation says, albeit based on a minority rabbinic received tradition in the name of Rav, offers further support and explicit, specifically rabbinic justification, which Ramban values for his offering of an anti-halakhic Pshat interpretation. So you see here the equality between the plain sense, the Pshat, and the rabbinic traditions. Just as Erel has identified Ramban's tendency to demonstrate how verses can be explained to fit the rabbinic traditions, here we identify Ramban's reverse tendency to demonstrate how halakhic traditions can be explained to accord with his Pshat interpretation of the verses, which offers support for these Pshat interpretations. In this case, despite the crucial role that rabbinic support offers for the Pshat interpretation, Ramban next affirms, V'zehu mashma'uto shel mikra. This indeed is the intent of, this view is indeed the intent of Scripture. Here, what is presented as confirmation of the idea that the month-long procedure must precede the cohabitation is not rabbinic authority, but rather the understanding that the obvious intent of the verse is indeed the Pshat interpretation. It appears that once he tallies all the evidence, here he indicates his preference for the Pshat interpretation as compared to the Halachic tradition. As Revel notes, the teachings based on Pshat and those based on rabbinic halachic interpretation overlap. The two realms are not separate and distinct from one another, but work in tandem to validate an idea. Nevertheless, it is obviously incorrect to consider Ramban as never adopting a Pshat interpretation at odds with the halacha. Okay, then we have another example here of the Arei Miklat. The Psukim list the 6 cities of refuge, that there are 6 Arei Miklat and 42 other cities. According to Chazal, all 48 cities were, in fact, functioned as Arei Miklat and would take in accidental murderers. But according to the Pshat, and Ramban introduces this Pshat interpretation, he says by way of Pshat, he thinks that only the 6 cities of refuge would offer protection to accidental murderers. And here again, the Pshat interpretation directly conflicts with the halachic tradition because either the 42 cities, extra cities, don't offer refuge or they do. Ramban does not backtrack from his Pshat interpretation, nor does he express his approval of the halachic tradition. In this specific case, there is a halachic tradition, a minority rabbinic halachic tradition that supports Ramban's Pshat. He does not quote it, but it would seem obvious that he knew about it because it follows right after the one that we mentioned previously about the beautiful captive woman. And in fact, almost 3 centuries after Ramban, Radvaz suggests that it's most likely that Ramban relied on that Yerushalmi because he wanted to uphold the Pshat. Okay, well, let's just wrap up. In the interest of time, I want to leave time for Yeshiva at the end. I suggest that by quoting this type of minority rabbinic traditions, Ramban affirms the equal validity of the 2 domains of biblical interpretation. Pshat can inform and confirm rabbinic halachic drashot, but so too can rabbinic drashot. Even minority ones inform and confirm Pshat interpretations. Our findings demonstrate that Ramban offered his Pshat interpretations and stood by them, even if they conflicted with accepted rabbinic halachic views. I believe it is a mistake to attribute to Ramban total fealty to rabbinic traditions when they conflict with the Pshat interpretations. In fact, Ramban's method is established and mature enough that he can truly maintain his fealty to both, and in every case investigate and evaluate all the evidence for various interpretations and the interplay between that evidence from whatever source it may have arisen. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Grunhaus. Rabbi Dr. Yitzchak Berger will address us next. Professor Berger is Professor of Biblical Studies at Hunter College of the City University of New York, where he also serves as Hebrew administrator. He specializes in medieval biblical interpretation and in literary interpretation of the Bible. His publications include the commentary of Rabbi David Kimchi to Chronicles, a translation with introduction and a super commentary, and Jonah and the Shadows of Eden. Rabbi Berger will address us, or Professor Berger will address us on creation and divine purpose, Radak on Psalm 104. Professor Berger.
It's a special honor, actually, in multiple ways, to participate in today's colloquium. As a student at YU and at Revel in particular, I benefited regularly from the library, where the quality of the collection was matched by the service and the environment that Mrs. Adler cultivated for so many years. On a personal note, Mrs. Adler also maintained a close relationship with my mother, who worked with her here for really for decades, and I would regularly see the two of them, along with Julie Berger, one of today's organizers, walking and conversing on Amsterdam Avenue. And since then, Mrs. Adler's absence has really been noticed and felt, and today's gathering is a very welcome and appropriate tribute to her. And if I could just ask, is my screen here? So anyway, we'll begin without it. Radak, as many of you know, Radak is a 13th century commentator from Provence, and he was really one of the early devotees of the Rambam. Radak became familiar with the Rambam's works as he was growing up. Translations of the Rambam's works from Arabic into Hebrew became available as Radak matured as an exegete. What emerged in my own studies of Radak is that, notwithstanding the fact that he is such a devotee of the Rambam, it's nonetheless the case that he went his own way in some striking ways. One of them involves kind of the basic approach he takes to Psalm 104, which is a creation psalm. It's a psalm that involves an appreciation of the creation, in which we recite on Rosh Chodesh the Psalm of Barchi Nafshi, you can see the psalm laid out here on the screen. It begins Barchi Nafshi et Hashem, where the psalmist asks his soul to bless the Lord, and then it ends at the end here with the same language of Barchi Nafshi et Hashem Hallelujah. The psalmist is saying that I and we have to bless God because of the creation. And this, in fact, is the purpose of our existence here in the world. And so the creation is here. All of the creations are here for us to appreciate precisely because it is we, human beings, who have the intellect to recognize God and divine glory. In this respect, Radak, adopting what is actually quite a traditional view, the notion that the world is here for human beings to appreciate the divine, really goes back to rabbinic sources. One of the many, or one of several sources, is the bracha we recite in Sheva brachos of Sha'akol bara l'chvodo, that all is here for the glory of God, which Radak understands to mean for the purpose of human beings to recognize divinity and come close to divinity. In this respect, Radak actually departs in an interesting and striking way from the Rambam. One of the Rambam's radical views was that, in fact, the world is here simply as an expression of the divine will. And in that way, we cannot even speak of the major creations that the Torah enumerates on the 6 days of creation as being there primarily for human beings or for any other purpose. The most radical example of this is that the Rambam writes that when the Torah says that the luminaries are there to illuminate the earth, that is not their purpose. That is just a description of their nature. Because when God created the luminaries, it was because it simply was His will that they exist. Radak departs from the Rambam on this in his commentary on the creation story in Bereshit, but it also informs his commentary here in the Psalm of Barchi Nafshi. So in the beginning, Radak writes on the second line, which is in red on the screen, V'amar barchi nafshi ki ein batachtonim mi sheyeda levarech ela nefesh adam hamaskelet. It is only the human soul or the human intellect that knows how to appreciate God. When we proceed to Radak's comment at the end of the psalm, which says Barchi nafshi et Hashem hallelujah, here we find something interesting and striking. In the rabbinic tradition, you find in several places recognition of the fact that there are poems in the Tanakh, and Tehillim in particular, that begin and end with the same language. You do not typically find traditional commentators up until recently recognizing that when there is a slight difference between the formulation at the beginning and at the end, that can speak to an important development in the poem. And here what you note here in the last line, also in red, is that where at the end of the Mizmor, it says, Borchi nafshi et Hashem halaluka. It adds that word halaluka, which sounds like a kind of innocuous term. Radak writes, do you know why it adds the word halaluka? It's because this Mizmor, like several other Mizmorim, after presenting what seems to be a very straightforward appreciation of God, or in this case, an appreciation of God's creation, throws in a negative line in order to complete the picture. We have this in Ashret, right? The Psalm 145, Tehillah David, which sounds entirely positive until you get to the end where it says, Vet kol harishaim yashmid. Psalm 104 also, you get to the last couple of lines, and then you find, suddenly, Yitamu chata'im min haaretz v'rishaim odeinam, that sinners are ultimately going to be banished from the earth. Radak notes this as a kind of coda to the psalm, and he writes that the psalm here is affirming that one day in the time of redemption, everyone will recognize God, because those who don't will be destroyed. And therefore this final line, Rishaim odeinam lachein amar linafsho, therefore the psalmist tells his soul, so to speak, Barchi nafshi et Hashem V'chein kol ha'amim halaluka. And similarly, all of the other nations ultimately, right, can be called on to bless God, because there will be nobody resisting that ultimately in a time of redemption. So much then for the frame of this Mizmor. I'll make just a few observations about the body of the Mizmor, where Radak notices something which, to the best of my knowledge, no one before him did, and which is likewise very striking. The presentation of the creations in Psalm 104 is noticed by many, and this is really what you will typically find if you open a modern commentary on the Psalm. You'll find that it is structured such that it begins with appreciating the heavens, it continues with an appreciation of the land, and finally it continues to an appreciation of the waters. And you see how on the screen here, in sort of the burgundy bolded words that precede the sections here, you see the word Shamayim, Eretz, and Mayim, and those mark the different sections of the psalm. Now Radak notes this. He does not deny this. He actually notices it on his own. You see this here in the top line here now. Hinei hizkir hadvarim hanehavim ba'avir v'achar kach yazkir haaretz v'hamayim. So Radak notices this structure, but strikingly, he does not limit himself to that particular structural conception of the Mizmor. Simultaneously, Radak superimposes what seems to be another structure. And again, this is something that, at least to the best of my knowledge, was not noticed until much, much later. You see in the blue bolded terms, that the Mizmor can be seen here to follow a different structure as well, and that is that it follows the order of the creation, except that you have to account for certain anomalies, for certain departures from the structure that you find in the first parak of Breshit. So you can note here how in the beginning of the Mizmor, on the top, Yom Rishon, the first day of creation, is acknowledged by the Mizmor, Oteh or Kasalman, Oteh Shamayim Kayiri'ah, that it makes reference to the creation of the light, and then followed by Yom Sheni, the creation of the second day, Hamakarev Hamayim Aliyotav, which refers to the things God does with the waters on the second day. Radak is quite committed to this structure simultaneously. You can see this in his commentary on that second verse, where he opens by saying, Heichel ba'or ki hu nivra tchila, that it begins with light because light was created first. So he is noting that it's following the initial order of the creation story, but simultaneously, as he proceeds to comment on the latter part of that verse, Notesh Shamayim Kayiriyah, Radak sees fit to say that the phrase Notesh Shamayim Kayiriyah, that God expands the heavens and stretches them out, that cannot actually be a reference to the opening verse in the Torah of Breshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Why not? He says, Zot habri'ah hayta biyom sheni. Right? I'm pointing here to the to this bolded part near the bottom of this page. He says, this Shammai must refer to what God did with the skies on the second day. Why? He says, Lo nuchal lefaresh ki al hashamayim ha'elyonim amar. It cannot refer to the heavens that are referred to on the first day. Ki heim nivru kodem ha'or biyom rishon. They were created first. So Radak is on the one hand actually quite committed to the order being in keeping with the order in Sefer Breshit. However, it becomes necessary, as one continues to interpret the psalm, to account for things that are out of order. And here Radak's solution is very straightforward. If we proceed to Radak's comments on the description in the Mizmor that corresponds to the third day of creation, in Pasuk Yud HaMishaleach, Ma'ayanim ba'nechalim, referring to the waters that irrigate the land, and Radak says, Mitakanat hamayim shasakel litakanat habruim. The Mizmor is telling us not just that God created what the third day of creation describes, but the Mizmor departs from that in order to show us how the things that God created are for the benefit of God's creations, which is, after all, Radak's reading of the purpose of the Mizmor. It is all ultimately for the purpose of human beings who will recognize God through an appreciation of the creations. To save time, we'll just kind of skip to one or two more manifestations of this. And if we proceed to the turning point in the Mizmor, where there's a line that seems to stick out. Marabu ma'asecha Hashem ma'odam kumach shvotecha. I'm sorry, that's the line in Mizmor Tzadi Bet. Ma'arabu ma'asecha Hashem. Did I get it right? Ma'arabu ma'asecha Hashem. How wondrous are your creation? How the world is full of your creations. This marks a turning point. It's after that point where the Mizmor will proceed to describe the waters. And Radak tells you here, he says, wait a minute, right? Finished telling you the creations of the earth, right? We're not going to be describing the creations of the sixth day, the creations of the animals and the human beings. Why is the Mizmor not going to do with that? Why is it shifting now to talk about the water, after which it will conclude? And Radak explains why shenit galgelu zichramim zecher hatzmachi b'hamorot. The Mizmor structured itself so that as soon as it mentioned something that God created, it provides the explanation of what are the creatures that this creation will service. And since in the description of the creations of the land on the third day, the vegetation and so forth, the Mizmor has already described for us how these things service animals and people, which are the creations of the sixth day, it is therefore no longer necessary for the Mizmor to treat those. So Radak, to sum up, notices this dual structure, which you see laid out here in the Mizmor, in the headings, Shamayim, Eretz, and Mayim on the one hand, but simultaneously, Radak notes how the Mizmor follows the creation story in Breshit, but does so as an expression, not of an account of the creation, but as an expression of how the creation benefits the creatures and ultimately human beings, so that the Mizmor fulfills its goal of explaining the very purpose of that creation, which is ultimately so that human beings can appreciate God in fulfillment of the objective of Shakol Bara L'Chvodo. And I will leave it here.
Professor Berger. Our next speaker is Shalamith Berger, Curator of Special Collections in Hebraica Judaica at the Mendel Gottesman Library. Shuli will address us on the King of Prussia and the censorship of Aleinu.
Okay, I'm gonna take a minute to speak about Leah, since I have the floor right now. I'm going to be speaking about Aleinu L'Shabeach, and we also have to thank Leah for a number of things. Now, Leah really, you potchim b'chvod achsanya, right? You praise your host. In this case, the host is actually the fifth floor, strange as that might sound. The fifth floor, thanks to Leah, really became a living space. She provided and gathered the resources and created a framework for a unique space, which combines the best of a library with a base medrash. In a sense, it created a base vad l'chachamim, a place, in a way, a Jewish think tank, where discussions of Judaica and Jewish matters arise organically with a collection of students and researchers and faculty and rabbanim. It's kind of a place to brainstorm. And I think this is unique among libraries. And of course, people complained about noise, et cetera, et cetera. So we created a mechitza. The fourth floor is now the quiet floor. But I think that's really something that's unique in libraries. We'd like to thank her for that. And I'm going to be speaking. Aleinu, the library recently acquired a decree by the King of Prussia against saying the sentence shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik, that they bow down to nothingness and pray to a God who won't save them. And when the library purchased this document through, it's called the Ereni Fund, a fund which was established for the library to purchase rare materials in the areas of Leah's intellectual interest. So we purchased this not that long ago, and I sort of said, oh, we're doing this, we're having this colloquium, and Leah was born on Yom Kippur, and Aleinu was associated with Yamim Noraim. So I got this into my head, not quite realizing what I was getting into. But, and just as background, parts of the phrase, Shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik, are actually in Sefer Yeshayahu. In other words, this is something that goes back. It's not like an invention of the 1700s or something. So the edict that the library purchased actually has two dates on it. Okay, 1703, when Frederick I, king in Prussia, first decreed it, and 1716, when his son, King Frederick Wilhelm, renewed the edict and added additional strictures to it. A sure sign that the original edict of 1703 was not being properly followed. But what you see on the screen here is actually not what the library purchased. This is actually, I got this off the internet from the Leo Beck Institute. This is what the 1703 decree looked like, right? It's all in German. I guess it's on your left. You can see there's a German text. There is some insertion of some Hebrew. You can see that on the right, maybe. Shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik. And then you can see the date, right? It's signed by Friedrich in 1703. So the document which the library acquired is the renewal of this decree in 1716. And you can see that it looks very different than the 1703. You can see that there's parallel columns in Hebrew letters and in German, and the decree actually specifies that this is how it should be printed. I haven't yet figured out, or maybe I just need to look further, who printed it, who set this up. But it actually says that it should be in Hebraishin, right? So in Hebrew, ba'osios, ivrios, uvalaz. This is all in the decree. Okay, so in Hebrew letters and in Lashon Ashkenaz, in what you might call Judeo-German, people argue about that. And then it says, Unteitschen Buchstaben gedruckt. And it should also be printed in German letters. And presumably, the addition of the Judeo-German text is so that Jews can't say, hey, what are you talking about? I couldn't understand what was written there. Now, this I just maybe personally found interesting, that how the dates were written. So you have the English date here. You have January 15th, 1716. And when you look at the Hebrew, it says, Hayom Yom Tesvav B'chodesh Yanuvar, okay? So 15 days in January, Bishnas Aleph with a Shmidjik, or Chupchik, or Geresh, okay? So that's 1,000. Then we have Taf, 400, Shin, 300, right? So now we have 1,700. Plus Tet Zayin, 16. So I had never come across this before, so I just thought that was kind of fun. So what does the decree say? Okay, I'm sort of going to talk about both the 1703 and the 1716. So we know that King Friedrich rules by the grace of God. It's followed by a long list of all the places he rules over, okay? It seems like, I did not count, but it sounds like it's Sheva, Vesrim, Umea Medina. Presumably he's trying to prove that, right, Prussia was kind of a new state, a new incarnation, so, right, he has rules over all these places, and the kingdom worries about the well-being, including the spiritual well-being of all its inhabitants, right? So we look at the poor Jewish people, the Arami Yidischen folk, whom God put in our land. We want to free them from their blindness and have them join us in our beliefs. So, right, this edict is really for the benefit of the Jews. So, the Jews, Aleinu was already a problem, but the worst problem is that they bow down to idols. So they focus on the word varik, right? Shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik, to nothingness, but it can also mean to spit. There's actually a Yiddish expression, kommen zum Ausspeien, meaning you came late, right? It's like you're coming for Aleinu. But apparently, according to this decree, this really happened. They also describe some sort of jumping. Maybe someone knows about this. Hinwegspringen, after the spitting, and says as though people had seen a monster, like something terrible. So the edict ordered rabbis to take an oath in Yiddish administered by government officials, stating that the passage will be omitted from Aleinu, if, of course, Shehem Mishtachavim Lahevel Varik continues to be said, the rabbis will have made a Shvuah Sheker. I mean, that's what it says in the text. They would be punished. They may possibly be expelled from Prussia, and knowledgeable Christians would be placed in the shuls to ensure that the decree is being followed. And this is what they say, von nun an bis zu ewigen Zeiten, from now on for eternity. Kein Yudi bar Yisrael man oder Weib, Ish o Isha. So any Jew, man or woman, young and old, in unseren Landen, in our lands, in their shul, beis haknesses, so in the synagogue, noch in seinem Haus, right? You're not supposed to say it in your house either. So how anyone would enforce this, I don't know. Okay, there's also, you shouldn't bring the children to shul, right? Because if you don't bring the children to shul, this practice won't continue. And also that this prayer, Aleinu, which was typically said silently, should now be recited loudly by the chazan, and it can be followed by the kahal. Let's see. It's also interesting because the edict makes reference to Aleinu having been written by Yehoshua, which would mean that it was written way before the Christian faith came into being, but somehow that's put aside. You know, the Jews are just using that as an excuse. And they say, whoever doesn't obey this decree, we will be mevazeh das hamelech, show contempt for the king. Thereby, I infer it's also showing contempt for Christianity. And of course, since the monarch rules in part by being accepted by God, that means the Jews might not be accepting the authority of the king. So this edict apparently was not always enforced. It was renewed in 1750, but its legacy lives on, and that certainly when I was growing up, any siddur I had, I mean, that line was not there. There wasn't even a space. I don't remember if there was punctuation. So that's something that I'm sure scholars have explored. But in recent years, it has made its way back into siddurim. For example, the Art Scroll. And now it's typically said in shuls. So thank you.
And to everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. There are many thank yous to share to those that contributed in so many ways for this evening. Well, unfortunately, I can't thank everyone individually at this moment. Each individual added immensely to this special event. Special thank you to the Colloquium Convening Committee, Shuli Berger, Tzvi Ereni, and Moshe Shapiro, who is unable to be here tonight. And we thank you, of course, for all attending. We will have a collation on the side, and we're going to figure out how to set up for Marav as well. Okay. Thank you. Good evening.